Everybody watching what they're saying, remember to watch what you say. The Wall Street Journal reporting lawyers inside the Pentagon are concerned about the spate of American airstrikes on Venezuelan ships that the Trump administration insists are piloted by narco-terrorists, and yet so far the administration has failed to provide any evidence. The Journal saying any internal questions lawyers raise about the legality of these airstrikes are being completely ignored by higher-ups inside the Pentagon. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky is an outspoken critic of the president's military buildup in the Caribbean, especially since none of it is being done with congressional approval, which is mandated by law. The Wall Street Journal, quoting Senator Rand Paul, is saying of the first air attack on the Venezuelan speedboat, quote, "How do we know the boat was coming to the U.S.? Are we going to blow up every boat? It is just insane," unquote. Lara Seligman, writing in the Wall Street Journal, that one Pentagon source says there's a distinct difference between Trump ordering airstrikes in the Middle East and airstrikes on those speedboats in the Caribbean. The difference being airstrikes in Yemen or even Iran have congressional approval dating back to an authorization to fight a global war on terrorism was passed in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. As I've said countless times, that 24-year-old war authorization directly targeted the people behind 9/11. So Trump right now is standing on dubious legal ground, connecting Latin American drug cartels from Venezuela to the people behind 9/11. The Journal reporting that some Pentagon officials could be personally liable now that a paper trail proves they had been duly warned by Pentagon lawyers that these Venezuelan airstrikes are against the law. Pete Hegseth, our current Pentagon chief, seen here sporting one of his many neo-Nazi tattoos, recently fired the Defense Department's top lawyers, replacing them with a legal team he said wouldn't serve as roadblocks, even going so far as to appoint his own personal attorney as a Navy judge advocate general. That's according to the latest reporting in the Wall Street Journal. Hegseth, whose own mother put into writing that he's a serial abuser of women, has gutted, according to the Journal, the entire office set up by President Biden inside the Pentagon, designed to lower the number of civilian casualties during war and or targeted airstrikes like the ones in Venezuela. The Wall Street Journal reporting that classified material presented to a select number of congressional lawmakers, not the Gang of Eight. This was after the Venezuelan airstrikes. They presented zero proof to lawmakers that the boats were carrying fentanyl and cocaine, or that the people killed on those boats were even drug smugglers, which the Venezuelan government insists they were not. On a previous episode, I outlined how these airstrikes violate not just international, but American rules of engagement that expressly forbid our military from firing on civilian ships when no imminent threat is present. And even if it were an enemy ship, rules of engagement dictate soldiers can't fire until the people on that ship have been given ample opportunity to surrender. Or in the case of the first Venezuelan airstrike, you can't fire if the boat is returning to shore. If you think that boat is what Trump claims it was, then Navy personnel are supposed to board and inspect it for contraband. But even then, they would still lack the legal authority to do that. So, Hegseth and Trump decided it's easier to just fire some missiles because any evidence of criminality on our military's part gets blown up along with the ship. This is the problem with having people like Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth in charge of our military. They have zero respect for the law. or the facts. Donald Trump justified the attack, saying it was an act of self-defense. But the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Gang of Eight, nobody from the Senate or House Intelligence Committee were briefed before or after the strikes. So far, there have been no congressional hearings, even though Democrats are calling for them. During his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday, FBI Director Kash Patel, a former Justice Department lawyer, was asked repeatedly for the legal justification behind these airstrikes, but Kash Patel wouldn't, more likely couldn't, answer. What we know is that on September 2nd, the United States Navy, using either an MQ-9 Reaper drone or an attack helicopter, fired on a Venezuelan speedboat, killing 11 people. New reporting suggests there were 2 strikes on that boat because the first strike didn't kill all 11, and so a second was ordered after the ship turned around, making its way back to shore. And if that is true, this would be a war crime because you cannot attack an enemy ship or a civilian ship that you think is smuggling drugs. You can't attack it, period. And you especially can't attack it in retreat when it's not firing on you. This is beginning to sound like a hunting expedition in the Caribbean, a show of force for the sake of showing force. It's Donald Trump telling Venezuela, Latin America, the UN, and American citizens, I can because I say I can. It is the job of Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune to demand answers. Their responsibility, their sworn oath, is to protect the Constitution, not the president, the Constitution. But instead, they're protecting Donald Trump because they fear him. In previous administrations, where a president's party also controlled the legislative branch, congressional leaders would at the very least go through the motions of demanding answers when the president tried to act unilaterally as commander-in-chief. To put this in a language Republicans can understand, you owe it to the Navy personnel launching those airstrikes and all the men and women in uniform to make sure we only put them in harm's way. We only ask them to kill when it's absolutely necessary. I know Trump and Hegseth don't give a rat's ass about those 11 people on that boat who are now dead. But those people weren't killed by a Reaper drone or a missile. They were killed by U.S. military personnel following a chain of command leading all the way up to the Oval Office. Actually, because it's Donald Trump, all the way down to the Oval Office. And there is a personal toll on everyone who helped launch those missiles, because they must live with the rest of their lives. They must live the rest of their lives with the consequences. We don't talk about this, but believe it or not, our soldiers didn't sign up to kill people. And if they did, they shouldn't be serving in our military. Killing, need I remind you, is ending somebody's life. So you want to make sure it's the right person you're killing. Soldiers are uneasy about killing, even when it's state sanctioned. The dirty, dark secret armchair generals, or the people who play generals on Fox News, the dirty, dark secret about war is that killing the enemy is what so often haunts our veterans who come home heroes because they fought in wars that were perfectly legal, but they're still haunted by what they did during war. There's a reason many of my father's friends came home from World War II only to smoke and drink themselves to death. And that was the good war. So it is the job of our commander-in-chief and the head of our Pentagon to guarantee our soldiers only kill for a just reason. It is the job of our leaders to protect our soldiers from the psychic scars that haunt them forever, should they begin to believe for even a second that the orders they followed or the war they fought were unjust. Our soldiers are not political playthings. Our soldiers are not stress dolls to be squeezed by half-men like Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth to act out their insecurities and aggressive impulses. If you care about the troops, you don't put them in harm's way unless it's absolutely necessary, and you don't make them take a life until it's absolutely necessary and legal. There is something not just unseemly, but dangerous when we have, as our Pentagon chief, someone like Pete Hegseth boasting about bringing lethality back to our military, celebrating death, insisting our soldiers' only job, quote, is to kill and blow things up, unquote. No, it is the job of our soldiers to win the hearts and minds of the people we're supposed to be fighting, and then only resort to violence as a last resort. If you want to win a war, you need a military that is, dare I say, woke. Now, I'm not a fan of General David Petraeus, and I think his surge in Iraq back in 2007 that he took credit for was just vamping until we finally admitted defeat, cut bait, and left Iraq. But if you go back and look at the planning for the surge, which is considered a success, it was woke. It was paying warlords not to fight and having our soldiers appealing to the children, the women, and the young men of Iraq not to want to kill them, our soldiers. We tried killing and blowing things up in Iraq and Afghanistan. All we accomplished was killing, blowing things up, and making the country we occupied hate us even more. So no, a woke military is an alert military. Ask David Petraeus. On September 15th, that would have been Monday, Trump boasted that another Venezuelan boat was hit by a U.S. airstrike, resulting in 3 more people being killed. That story buried. It was old news. The first airstrike, the one on September 2nd, Americans were somewhat concerned about, but because there was zero pushback from Congress, our soldiers were ordered to kill 3 more people, and that went completely unnoticed. And who can keep track? The media, the politicians, and the voters. We get acclimated to violence because there's way too much going on to pay attention to another airstrike. You know, there is a mass shooting nearly every single day. The only time we wring our hands is when there's nothing else happening in the news. Suddenly we go, oh, there's been a school shooting. So that was Monday. And then on Tuesday, Trump boasted of yet another airstrike on a Venezuelan boat. So far, no list of casualties, no real reporting on this, because who can keep track of all these atrocities when Trump is flooding the zone? This is John Yoo. Some of you might remember Yoo from the George W. Bush administration when he wrote the legal memos justifying torture, or as he referred to it, enhanced interrogation techniques. Sounds to me like John Yoo was performing enhanced interrogation techniques on the English language. It's torture. Call it what it is. I could dedicate an entire week of shows to what John Yoo unleashed with those legal memos justifying torture down in Gitmo. But stay with me on this. Remember the name John Yoo. I'm coming back to him in a second. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who at one time took credit for 9/11, has been awaiting trial for decades for 9/11, along with 4 other accomplices. You know what? That's a bad picture of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It was taken by our military right after they grabbed him, before he could freshen up. And the lighting is an assault on the senses. They didn't even give him a chance to shave, do his hair, slip into a clean blouse before they snapped that picture. Somebody call The Hague because I'm reporting a fashion war crime. Okay, a little better. I touched the photo up. Look, a man is innocent. This man is on trial, and a man is innocent until proven guilty. And I think you contaminate the jury pool when you flood the internet for the past 2 decades with pictures of this guy looking so disheveled. And I think this is a little touch up so he can get a fair trial. Too much body hair. How's he going to get a fair trial with all that body hair? Is that a terrorist or a topiary? What chance does this man have proving to a jury that he's not a beast when he's got more foliage than Sasquatch? Okay, now he's ready for his trial. Wait, something still doesn't seem right. Oh, I see. In between the 2 pictures, all his chest hair grew back. This man has a lot of testosterone coursing through his veins. That's why he's got all the body hair, plus the anger issues, testosterone. Okay, a lot better. I combed his hair, but his chest hair grew back. Can't get a fair trial with chest hair like that. So let's put him in a clean white t-shirt. Nice, right? Now, I was torn. First, I thought you go with a V-neck to mitigate all the chins. A V-neck extends the face's longitude, allowing the chins to fade into the background. But he's got all that body hair, which the V-neck accentuates. So I went with a crew neck that lays closer to the base, but mitigates the body hair. I think he was left with no good choices on the t-shirt. The point I'm making is, see what a little sprucing up can do. Now we can go to trial. Something is still annoying me. You know what? It's the eyebrows. He looks like Joan Crawford and Brooke Shields gave birth to a merkin. What is going on with those caterpillars, boyfriend? You got to take care of them before a family of butterflies burst out of those gnarly cocoons. See? Much better. Much better. Grooming is a game of centimeters, fellas. You go from here, right there, right? Now let's put him in a nice jacket. Ah, look how handsome you are. Red tie. Look at you. Look at you. So much better. Guys, it doesn't take much. Some moisturizer, a little conditioner and rinse for the hair, a decent suit. You don't really need to spend a lot of money to go from this, boo, to this. Yay. From Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, mastermind of 9/11, to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, host of CNBC's The Closing Bell, weeknights at 4 p.m. From this to this. You know, I always say this to my adopted sons. My adopted sons. I have dozens of adopted sons. I always tell them hair and skincare is a lot like life. It's the little choices we make without our even knowing it that soon become the biggest choices we make. The point I'm making is it's impossible to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and possibly 4 other men down at Gitmo, not just because of this picture, but because they were all tortured. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was captured in Pakistan. By the way, not Afghanistan. Pakistan. Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. So Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, in March of 2003, was taken into American custody and waterboarded 183 times in just 1 month. That's a lot of water, especially in 2003, which I remember as being a drought year in Los Angeles. Anyway, waterboarding is considered by international law torture because for as long as the waterboarding lasts, it creates a continuing sensation of drowning. And back then, when we first found out about the waterboarding, conservatives who defended George W. Bush, they claimed the Geneva Conventions didn't know what they were talking about. Waterboarding isn't torture. And many of these conservatives insisted, I'll prove to you it's not torture. Waterboard me. But after 3 seconds of waterboarding, they screamed for it to stop and said, yeah, it's torture. They said it's torture, but do it to them anyway. So as interrogators were attempting to get a confession out of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, they deprived him of sleep for days. In fact, at one point, he was forced to stay awake for more than a week. Then there was something called walling, which is basically repeatedly smashing his skull against a wall, and then more waterboarding. By then, he confessed to 9/11, Pearl Harbor, and Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction during the 2004 Super Bowl halftime show, which is why confessions are inadmissible in a court of law. It's why we can't put him on trial even though we pretend he's on trial. You can't put him on trial. Torturing him is inadmissible in a court of law. But this was never about getting to the truth about 9/11. George Bush and Dick Cheney already knew the truth about 9/11, which is why they never wanted a trial. They wanted war because they wouldn't look so good once all the evidence about 9/11 was made public. Instead, they were so humiliated and angry about 9/11, they took it out on these enemy combatants down in Gitmo and in dark sites around the world. There was the waterboarding and there was the rectal rehydration. That was done in Gitmo. Rectal rehydration that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, then serving at the time as a naval JAG officer inside Gitmo, he found it very amusing. There are reports that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would laugh hysterically as enemy combatants detained in Gitmo were force-fed through a tube, which, like waterboarding, also creates the sensation of drowning, but this time it feels like you're drowning through your ass. Or sometimes it feels like you're drowning through your nose. Depends what kind of mood our CIA agents conducting these enhanced interrogations were in. They got to decide whether it was going to be a nose or an ass day. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, creator of Alligator Alcatraz, his very own torture chamber, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis reportedly back then thought watching other men force-fed through the rectum or the nose was hysterical. And I can see how that could seem funny, but only if it were happening to somebody like Ron DeSantis. By the way, I don't know if you could get force feed him through the rectum. I think his is way too, I think he's sewn it shut. And there's a myth about we were feeding these guys through the rectum and not torturing them. No, we were just feeding them. No, we were torturing them. Shoving proteins into your rectum doesn't deliver nutrition to the rest of the body. I know that because if it did, Lindsey Graham would weigh 1,600 pounds by now. Bottom line, if you'll pardon the pun, bottom line is we can't put the people who masterminded 9/11 on trial because we tortured confessions out of them. But our military, our government pretends that these 9/11 trials are still happening. 9/11 was what, 24 years ago? And right now, we have military lawyers representing the government trying to prosecute the mastermind behind 9/11. And they're parsing what they call clean interrogations versus dirty interrogations. That's what they call torture, a dirty interrogation. It's gone from John Yoo calling it an enhanced interrogation technique to just plain dirty. We keep pretending we are putting the men who orchestrated 9/11 on trial, but it's never going to that trial is never going to take place. But we keep saying it's going to take place. It's been 24 years. We keep saying there's going to be a trial because we must convince ourselves we're a nation of laws. But we're not a nation of laws because these confessions, clean or dirty, won't hold up in a court of law. And the Americans who ordered the waterboardings have never been prosecuted. John Yoo, who authored the torture memos, was never disbarred. In fact, he's now a law professor. So, here's the thing about using the military to fight a global war on terrorism, like George W. Bush decided to do, or using the military to fight a global war on drug addiction, the way Donald Trump this year has decided to do. Before George W. Bush, global terrorism was fought by our FBI cooperating with other international law enforcement agencies like Interpol. We used to do that because terrorism doesn't involve state actors. Saddam Hussein and the Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. Nothing. Pakistan knew where bin Laden was. That's why we ended up killing him there. It's why Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's supposedly on trial, he was arrested in Pakistan, not Afghanistan. But Bush wanted to use the military to fight terror. He wanted a war on terror, which is a method of war, not an ideology or a state actor. There is no nation called Terroristan, although one more year of Trump, and I'm pretty certain that's what they're going to be calling this place, the United States of Terroristan. So I said I'd come back to torture and John Yoo, the author of those memos, and all the misery he unleashed. Why am I bringing up John Yoo now? Because John Yoo, one of the worst people of the 21st century, even he is coming out against these airstrikes on those Venezuelan ships. The Washington Post reporting that John Yoo, the author of the waterboard memos, now saying there has to be a line between crime and war, unquote. Apparently for John Yoo, that line is the difference between on water versus in water. It's a war crime if you attack people on water, but it's not a war crime if they're in water. John Yoo now saying the Trump administration has failed to explain why it's legal to use the military to defeat drug cartels. He also said preventing the flow of drugs into our country falls under the jurisdiction of law enforcement, not the military. Now, earlier I explained terrorism used to fall under the jurisdiction of law enforcement. And when it comes to drugs, our FBI and our DEA cooperates with law enforcement agencies around the world trying to bring drug dealers to justice without resorting to the military. We did that with drugs up until Trump this year. And we did that with terrorists up until George W. Bush. We used to view terrorist attacks as a crime. I remember right after 9/11, people were shouting, "This means war." And I asked, war with whom? This means law enforcement, the way we got the people who bombed the World Trade Center the first time using law enforcement. I know this is a strange concept for most Americans these days, but fighting terrorism and fighting drugs used to be the job of law enforcement. And even John Yoo, who authored the torture memo, says it's hard to find any congressional action that ever authorized the use of military force to stop the flow of drugs into our country. Again, there was a congressional authorization to fight global terrorism, which is why Trump, first thing back in office, labeled Tren de Aragua from Venezuela, that gang, he labeled them a terrorist organization, thinking he could hitch these Venezuelan airstrikes onto the 2001 war authorization to fight global terror. But that war authorization doesn't give a president an open-ended invitation to use our military any way he sees fit. Again, the attacks on Yemen and Iran that Trump has ordered, by some stretch, they do fall under the 2001 war authorization. But shipping drugs into the United States isn't terrorism. It's criminal. It's illegal. It should be stopped, but it isn't terrorism. And the best way to stop drugs from coming into our country is providing free mental health care so there's no market for these drugs in the first place. But there's more money in fighting drug addiction than curing it. There's more money in it for the for-profit rehab centers that Mitt Romney's Bain Capital owns. There's more money in weapons and ammunition to fight the drug cartels than there is in providing treatment on demand. The truth is, the people in charge, they want us sedated. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. If you enjoyed any of this, please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Please share it. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I will see you tomorrow.